right, thanks guys. So I'm going to tell you about how I started the company and some of the things I learned. And the main focus of a lot of it is it revolves around a question I've always asked myself since I was a kid, which is, why do I exist? Why am I on Earth? I'm just very philosophical, so everything I do starts with that question actually, and it led me here, which has been a weird path. Okay, some background on Apptimize. You did a great intro. We started the company 4 years ago. That's when we did Y Combinator. 3 years ago is when we launched, and that's when we raised our Series A, a little after that. 2 years ago is when we raised our Series A. At that point, it was $6 million. And then last year was when we raised our Series B. So now we've raised more than $20 million, and we have customers all around the world. We're probably installed on your phone right now because we're in the top apps in every category, basically. So Wall Street Journal, Starbucks, Western Union, Hotel Tonight, Trulia, just anyone with an app is our customer. So I'm going to tell you how I use this question of why I exist to guide myself as a CEO and as everything in my life. So when you're a startup founder, people are always asking you, why did you start this company? What's your vision? What's the mission of all of this? Why Apptimize? I get less, but I still get the question of why I started a company in the first place. I think that there's those stories of kids that sell milk door to door when they're a kid, and they start their own computer company or something like that. And I know Drew Houston had an SAT prep class that he started in high school. Those stories are amazing, and I'm always yeah, of course you're a founder because you just have it in you somehow. But that's really not me. I wasn't the type of kid that did that. I read a lot. I thought a lot. I was in my own head a lot. After a lot of my motivations around everything that I did, up until I started this company really, were pretty individualistic. It was I want to be number one. I want to prove how good I am. I want to learn more stuff. I want to challenge myself. And that was enough to get me pretty far in life. That kind of attitude, that ambition was always there. And I think it was because, I felt really blessed. I knew that my parents had sacrificed a lot to give me a lot of advantages, so I held myself to a really high standard. I didn't compare myself to them, of course, because their lives were really hard. My life was pretty easy, so I was I should do even better. And the first thing I did after college was I went into high-frequency trading, and I wasn't really thinking about, anything other than paying off all of my debts and taking financial responsibility for myself. It was about doing something that I knew I'd be pretty good at doing, and knowing that I could be the best at it and prove that I was number one. And it was really fun. I got really lucky with high-frequency trading. I could see that it's really obvious right away if you're doing well or not. And when you're doing better than someone else, it's really obvious, and you can point to it. After a short period of time, I was the top trader in the company. I ran the top team. We made the most money. We traded the most asset classes. And I thought things were going great. There was nothing in me that was I need to start a company. This is a burning thing. I felt really good about myself. My main goal had been to pay off all my student loans and everything because we were always poor growing up. My parents, I had free milk as a kid, free lunch and everything, and I had a lot of financial aid for college, and a lot of my objectives around making sure that I took responsibility for myself financially. And it definitely did that. With the first bonus I ever even got, I paid off all of my debts, and pretty soon I was really responsible for myself and for my whole family. I thought that was just what I was going to do. I think I didn't view myself as an entrepreneur. I didn't view myself as a founder. I viewed myself as someone who was really good at high-frequency trading and was just going to do that for the foreseeable future. And I wasn't super introspective about what that was going to take me. But then a lot of things changed that caused me to revisit why I was doing anything. It kind of started with when I started taking responsibility for more than just myself, when I started taking over my family finances and looking after my parents more. I realized that that's just slightly more responsibility than it was for me to just be responsible for myself. It required another level of discipline and drive. And it got a lot harder when both my parents got cancer. And they both got cancer at the same time, which was really crazy and weird. And everyone would always be like, why do you think that's happening? That's so surprising. But it was stage 3 and stage 4. And every weekend, I would go fly somewhere to visit one of my parents because they lived in different states. So I was based out of Chicago and New York, and my parents were based out of Pittsburgh and New Jersey. So I would fly to alternately visit them. And I got to think a lot while I was on those flights and while I was in the hospital with them. I thought a lot about what's the point of all of the money I'm making and how I'm able to take care of them when they're just suffering kind of like everyone else. And we were just kind of on the same level as everyone who didn't have a lot of our advantages, and even people who were above us. It was just very humbling. And something that really touched me was a lot of people came to the hospital who were complete strangers, who visited my parents and made them soup and stuff that they didn't even know us. And that's definitely not a thing that would have occurred to me, especially at the time, because I was I'm loyal to the people that I know, but at the time I wasn't very reaching out to strangers or doing anything like that. So I started thinking about how it was kind of cool that they were taking responsibility for us even though they didn't know us, and how there's this whole society around us where people kind of care about each other even though we don't really know each other and have anything to do with each other. And that really moved me to think about some more stuff in my life. Be what would it mean if I were responsible for more than just me and more than just my parents and my immediate family, or even just the people I know? What would it mean if I were responsible for people that I'll never meet even, or completely strangers, or people who I'll never meet because they'll exist after I'm dead, like all the future people. And it was this kind of circle of thinking that kind of confronted me with these hard questions that I wasn't thinking about in the day-to-day life. And I think that's what happens to you when there's these big events that just show you how your whole plan and everything you thought made sense really don't make sense. So I spent a lot thinking about how much I owed everybody. I think that had always motivated me because a lot of what would drive me through going to MIT and doing well in trading and everything I'd done before that was how much I owed my parents. It's not I'm very Chinese and into filial piety at all, actually, because when you would talk with my parents, I never did any chores, and I was always not listening to them. But at the same time, I was very aware that I had a lot of advantages that they didn't have. And I was aware that I could never repay all of the debts that I owed them. It's just impossible, because it's not like I ever even asked them for the stuff that they did for me. They just did it on their own. And then I started thinking about, well, now I owe all these strangers who are visiting us in the hospital this debt that I can also obviously never pay them because I never asked them for this either. And then I was thinking about, well, what about all of these people who, existed before I was born, who created all the science and technology that allowed me to do anything. And that kind of motivated me to get out of bed a lot of the time. It wasn't it wasn't like I was ever lazy, but sometimes it was a lot of work to do the work that I was doing, running these teams and doing everything. And I would just think, what if instead of getting out of bed and doing his work and inventing, the printing press like Gutenberg did, or what if Einstein stayed in bed and didn't come up with all this research, and he just did what I feel like doing, which is staying in bed, watching Netflix, texting my friends, or something like that. Then we would never have all the stuff that we have now. So I would also motivate myself through thinking about all the debts that I owed these people that I wouldn't, from centuries ago. And I started to feel like I really wanted to make sure that my life was not a waste of time, that I could pay forward some of the stuff that I felt like I'd really benefited from and that we all benefit from. And it's a hard question of thinking of how to do that, because I never really thought about things in those frames before, but thinking about why do I exist? What is the impact I'm gonna have on the world even after I'm dead was something that really bothered me and just something I'd never stopped thinking about. And it's weird because you don't really ask yourself those questions usually especially in finance, because the purpose is very clear. It's like to make more money, and that's the moral good. Like it would be immoral and incorrect to do something that caused you to make less money. So it was confusing thinking about it in that sense. And I don't know, just even starting a company at all was a weird conclusion because like I was doing well. It's not, some of my friends, they were like, oh, I started a company because I could never get hired. But that was not me. Like, you know, I could totally get hired and continue just working well. But I was thinking about like, how do I make sure that I actually don't feel guilty anymore about all this stuff that I owe the rest of humanity? And yeah, just thinking back to the people that I actually really admire and that I feel like I owe the most to, everything that I have, I realize it's because of somebody who rose above their own self-absorption. I wouldn't exist if it weren't for, you know, people who decided to do something to add to the world above their own comfort. And you know, that just caused me to work a lot harder and think like, what is the hardest thing that I could do? Because honestly, like the thing with my parents was the hardest thing that had happened to me. Before that, my life was pretty easy. I would work hard, and it wasn't as easy as a lot of other people's lives, but it was like really easy compared to my parents' life. And I was just continuing to ask myself, like, why do I exist? And in the face of death and all this stuff, like that question just starts to like come at you all the time. And I decided that my mission in life was to make as much impact on the world even after I'm dead, and as much as possible while I'm alive as well. I never really decided to care about that wide a sphere of impact before. I'd always just, you know, thought I need to achieve a lot to, you know, take care of the people that I know. But this was my answer to caring about not wasting my life, making sure that I felt like I'd contributed something. And I knew that starting a company would be really hard for me because it wasn't my natural tendency at all. I had no background in this, and no one in my company had, and no one in my family had done this. The reason I decided that I wanted to do something that allowed other people to innovate more is because I felt like that was the ultimate solution to things. Part of me really wanted to just keep making more money because I was making a good amount, and it was fun. It was fun to dominate. It was fun to be number one. But I just thought that making more money was kind of inadequate because to scale, you need to invent stuff. Even if you have all the money in the world, you can't really feed all people forever without something innovative. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, we helped people accelerate learning. And that's one of the themes that Apptimize is all about. I'm not going to talk too much about the current company except like, you know, we help people understand more about their users and their business that they wouldn't know otherwise. And that makes me feel really happy when our customers say that they learned all this stuff. When they say that they feel like they're geniuses because of our product, that makes me feel like I'm helping people forward. And then, okay, so after I got an okay answer to why I existed, and you know, decided to start a company, like it was still really hard. From the outside, I think you could look at our company and think that it was going really well. Like our first customers were pretty big companies. We were signing, you know, Rakuten and Starbucks and stuff like that. We're in a lot of different apps, hotels.com, you know, just companies that are major and important wanted to use us and thought our software was important. But if you guys have ever seen that show, Silicon Valley, a lot of the things that happened in season 1 also happened in my company. I hadn't really thought about all of the lists until I was like looking at a recap. But basically, it's true we all lived in my house, and I had a lot of people who refused to move out of my house. So they were living there for free. We had engineers who argued over which one was better and which one should be the manager of the other. This is like in a 3-person team. And we had people threaten to sue us over a trademark. We had a gigantic Hooli-like company try to acquire us and then say they wanted to partner with us and then try to clone our whole product. And then I remember as we were watching season 1 and all this was happening to us like concurrently, I was like, wow, I really want to see what happens in season 2 so that I know what is going to happen to Apptimize. And you know, we all worked every day for the first several years of the company. We worked on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and New Year's Day, and I'd ask my team, like, are you sure you want to work on Christmas Eve? And they'd be like, yeah, I don't have anything else to do. This is what I do. And you know, even after we raised our Series A and it was less like we're on the verge of death, we still worked on Sundays. I asked the team, and they were like, yeah, I couldn't do without Sunday. Like, when are we going to have all our internal meetings and stuff? We worked the most when things were going well, because I think that's when you're really seeing progress and you're motivated. Yeah, like That's the thing. When things are easy and it's great, everything's great. You know, everyone's happy, everyone's motivated. But what keeps the team going when it's hard? When it's super hard, there were a lot of things that were really hard. My co-founder left after a year and a half. That was very stressful and hard. Like all the rounds of funding were pretty hard. I mean, we got very lucky with our first round because that round was very good to us. And it was right after Y Combinator, and we set a lot of records when we raised that round. But when I was raising our Series B last year, several of our investors straight out told me not to do it. It was, I don't know if you recall, but it was in the beginning of last year when there was this SaaS apocalypse thing going on. The LinkedIn and everybody was getting smashed in the public markets. There were all these blog posts about how it's a venture correction and stuff like that. And I just, every time someone just forwarded me one of these blog posts, I'd be like, why, why show this to me? What's your idea? Like, we have to raise this round. And then it was still really good to us. Like, we still raised a really good round. We raised more than $12 million, and we had really top-tier investors involved. But it was hard, and it was an intensive process. And when things get hard, what keeps you going? And it goes back to the philosophical question that I pose to myself every day still. Like, why do I exist? And I'll challenge my team to answer that question, and I'll ask myself that question. And it's weird because, when someone's like, why'd you start Apptimize? What's the vision? I have my pitch, right? I have my spiel. So that answer kind of starts to fade in intensity to you because it's scripted. But for me, it's a really comforting exercise when things are hard. I genuinely ask myself, why are we doing this? Because I don't need this. Part of me is always like, I can just go back to trading or go do something else. I don't need this. But then, it's a hard thing to answer because you have to figure out what makes you happy and what you really think, what you really are motivated by when nobody's looking at you, when nobody's watching. When things are going well, it's easy to answer the questions because it's going well. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I started this company. People obviously want this. But when it's not going well and people aren't taking your calls or whatever's going on and people are leaving, then you really have to look at yourself, and it's a much harder question to answer then. But if you have a good answer, then I think that gets you out of bed in the morning, and it wakes you up, and it makes sure that the team is motivated. That's a real time when the answer matters, because most of the time when you ask that question, the people are just kind of randomly curious. They don't really care about the answer. But when you ask yourself that question, that's the most important question to ask is why, and the most important person to ask that of is yourself. Okay, so I'm wrapping this up now because I'm out of time. I want to say that I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the kindness of so many people. The startup community is really great, so if I can in any way pass on the stuff that I've learned, feel free to reach out to me. It's not like we've made it at all, so don't just listen to everything I say. We still got a long ways to go, but yeah, please let me know if I can help. Thank you.